The last time I saw my mother-in-law's face before it all fell apart, she was smiling. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a queen observing a particularly uninteresting insect. She leaned across the polished mahogany of her dining table, the diamonds on her fingers catching the light of the chandelier, and whispered, so only I could hear, "It must be so exhausting, dear, trying to keep up." And in that moment, I realized my husband wasn't going to save me. Because he was smiling too. They thought they had broken me, that they had won. But they underestimated the fury of a woman with nothing left to lose. If you've ever been made to feel small, if you've ever been judged and found wanting by people who have everything, then you know the fire that kind of humiliation can light. Stick with me, and I'll tell you how I used that fire to burn their world to the ground. And if this story resonates with you, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe, so you don't miss a moment of the reckoning. Part 1. The Gilded Cage. It all started with a teacup. Not just any teacup. It was a piece of antique Meissen porcelain, delicate as a robin's egg, with a hand-painted floral pattern so intricate you could lose yourself in it. It was part of Evelyn's prized collection, a set that had been in her family, the Sterling family, for generations. To me, it was just a cup. A beautiful, fragile cup, but a cup nonetheless. To Evelyn, it was a symbol. It was heritage, lineage, and most importantly, it was money. Money so old it had its own accent. The first time I held one, my hands trembled. We were at one of her infamous Sunday brunches at the Sterling mansion, an imposing stone fortress that looked down on the rest of the town with the same disdain Evelyn reserved for me. My husband, Mark, had just introduced me to his parents a few weeks prior. I was nervous, hopelessly out of my element in my best dress from a department store sale rack, surrounded by women in couture and pearls. Evelyn glided towards me, her posture perfect, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon. She wasn't overtly hostile, not at first. Her cruelty was an art form, a masterpiece of subtlety. She handed me the teacup, her fingers cold and dry where they brushed against mine. "Be careful with that, Laura," she said, her voice a low, melodious hum that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's worth more than the car you drove here in." A nervous laugh caught in my throat. I looked to Mark, hoping he'd say something, anything to cut the tension. He just smiled, a lazy, charming smile that I was beginning to learn was his default response to any form of conflict. "Mom's just proud of her things," he murmured, squeezing my shoulder. He didn't see the barb. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. That was the beginning. Every interaction from then on was a carefully calibrated assault on my self-worth. My background was humble. My father was a mechanic, my mother a schoolteacher. We had love and we had laughter, but we certainly didn't have a portfolio of stocks or a summer home in the Hamptons. To Evelyn, this wasn't just a difference in circumstance, it was a fundamental flaw in my character, a genetic stain that no amount of effort could wash away. At family dinners, surrounded by Mark's aunts, uncles, and cousins, all of them polished and perfect cogs in the Sterling machine, Evelyn would hold court. She'd compliment my dress, then add, "It's amazing what they can do with synthetics these days." She would ask about my parents, and after I'd tell a story about my dad fixing a neighbor's car for free, she'd pat my hand and say, "How quaint. The working class has such a communal sense of poverty." The remarks were always delivered with a polite, almost pitying smile. To anyone else, she was just making conversation. But I felt the venom in every syllable. They were little poison darts, each one finding its mark, leaving a tiny, festering wound. I'd feel a hot flush of shame creep up my neck, my hands would grow clammy under the heavy linen napkin in my lap. The food, always exquisitely prepared by their private chef, would turn to ash in my mouth. My internal monologue was a constant scream. "Say something. Defend yourself. Tell her that your father's generosity is worth more than all her stupid teacups." But the words would never come. I was paralyzed by the sheer, unshakable confidence of her condescension. It was a world I didn't understand, a game with rules I hadn't been taught. And Mark. Mark was my greatest disappointment. When we were alone, he was everything. He was warm, funny, and he made me feel like the only person in the world. He'd listen to my frustrations about his mother, nod sympathetically, and say things like, "That's just how she is, babe. She doesn't mean it. She's from a different generation." He'd wrap me in his arms and kiss my forehead, and his warmth would be a temporary anesthetic for the poison she'd injected. I clung to those moments, convinced myself that his love was enough to build a shield against her. I was wrong. His love wasn't a shield, it was a blindfold. The worst of it came about a year into our marriage. Mark's father, a quiet, perpetually tired man named Richard, had always been civil to me. He wasn't warm, but he lacked his wife's active malice. One evening, after a particularly brutal dinner where Evelyn had spent 20 minutes dissecting the financial inadequacies of my alma mater, Richard pulled me aside in the library. The room smelled of old leather and lemon polish. The air was heavy with the silence of generations of accumulated wealth. Richard stood by the fireplace, swirling a brandy snifter. "Laura," he began, his voice raspy, "I want you to understand something about my wife." I braced myself for a defense of her behavior, another excuse. She wasn't always like this," he said, his eyes distant. "When we were young, she had dreams, ambitions. But her father believed a woman's place was to marry well and manage a household. She was meant to be the CEO of this family, not the company." He took a slow sip of his brandy. "She fought it for a while, but in the end, she did what was expected. She married me, took over the social calendars, the charity boards, and all that ambition, all that fire, it curdled. It turned into this obsession with status, with control. Because it's the only power she was ever allowed to have." He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like sympathy in his tired eyes. "She sees you, a girl from nowhere, who got an education, who has a mind of her own, who married her son, and she sees it as a threat to the only thing she has ever been allowed to build. This family, this legacy." He sighed, a sound heavy with decades of resignation. "I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm just explaining. Be careful, my dear. This house has a way of breaking things." His words didn't make me feel better. They made me feel worse. They painted Evelyn not as a simple villain, but as a tragic one, a woman so hollowed out by her own gilded cage that her only recourse was to try and lock me in one too. It was terrifying. But the true poison was still seeping in, drop by agonizing drop. It was in the way Mark started to echo her opinions. He'd suggest I take etiquette classes, or hire a stylist. "It's not for me, Laura, it's for you. I want you to feel comfortable at these events." He'd say it with such earnestness, as if he were doing me a favor, completely oblivious to the fact that he was telling me, in the kindest way possible, that I wasn't good enough as I was. The final, shattering blow came on our second anniversary. I had planned a small, intimate dinner for just the two of us at our apartment, the one place that felt like my own territory. I spent all day cooking his favorite meal. I bought a bottle of wine that was far too expensive for our budget. I wanted to recapture the magic we had at the beginning, before his family's shadow had eclipsed everything. He was 2 hours late. He walked in smelling of expensive whiskey and another woman's perfume. It was faint, but it was there. My heart dropped into the pit of my stomach, a cold, heavy stone. "Where were you, Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, avoiding my eyes. "I'm so sorry, babe. I got held up. Mom hosted a last-minute reception for some investors from Zurich. You know how it is. It was important for the company. More important than our anniversary." He finally looked at me, and his expression was one of weary frustration. "Laura, don't be dramatic. This is real life. These things matter." My parents' company, Sterling Industries, it pays for this apartment. It pays for that wine you bought. It pays for our life. Sometimes, we have to make sacrifices. That's when she called him. His phone buzzed on the counter, Evelyn's name flashing on the screen. He answered it immediately. Hi, Mom. Yes, I just got home. No, she understands. Of course. He listened for a moment, his back to me. Then he turned, a strange, apologetic look on his face. Mom wants to make sure I reiterate something to you, he said, his voice taking on a formal, rehearsed quality. She knows you're sensitive about your background. She just wants you to understand the realities of this world. Money runs the world, Laura, and unfortunately, you don't have any. She's worried you're becoming a burden, a distraction from my responsibilities. He said it. He actually repeated her words. The exact phrase she'd whispered to me at countless dinners. A burden. Something inside me snapped. The carefully constructed facade of patience and hope I had been maintaining for 2 years crumbled into dust. I looked at the man I loved, the man I had married, and I saw a stranger. A puppet. His mother's words coming out of his mouth. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A strange, glacial calm washed over me. The pain was so immense it was silent. Get out, I whispered. What? Laura, come on, don't overreact. I said, get out, I repeated, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. Go back to your mother. Go back to your money. This is over. He stared at me, dumbfounded, as if he couldn't comprehend that I was capable of defiance. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Mark, the boy I fell in love with, a flash of panic in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a defensive arrogance. Fine, he scoffed. Fine. If that's how you want to be. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've thrown away. You'll have nothing. He was right about that. The next day, his lawyer called. The prenuptial agreement Evelyn had insisted upon was ironclad. I had walked into the marriage with nothing, and I would walk out with nothing. Not a single cent of the Sterling fortune would touch my hands. They even made a point of demanding the return of all jewelry Mark had ever given me. Each piece a reminder of a promise he had failed to keep. I packed a single suitcase. My clothes, a few books, and a framed photo of my parents. As I walked through the apartment for the last time, my eyes landed on a porcelain vase on the mantelpiece. A housewarming gift from Evelyn. It wasn't a Meissen, just an expensive imitation. A reminder of my status. Not good enough for the real thing. Without thinking, I picked it up, walked to the window, and let it drop 3 stories to the pristine sidewalk below. The sound of it shattering was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of my old life breaking. The sound of my new life beginning. As I walked out the door and into the cold, unforgiving city, I made myself a promise. I would never again be vulnerable. I would never again be powerless. And one day, I would build a world so vast and so strong that people like Evelyn and Mark wouldn't even be allowed through the gates. They thought I would have nothing. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Part 2. The Ashes and the Grind. Leaving Mark's world was like stepping off a cliff in the dead of night. For 2 years, I had lived in a state of suspended animation, a world of soft lighting, catered meals, and silent, judgmental staff. Now I was in free fall. The silence of my new life was deafening, punctuated only by the wail of distant sirens and the relentless hum of the ancient refrigerator in my new apartment. If you could call it an apartment. It was a shoebox on the 5th floor of a walk-up in the city's least fashionable neighborhood. The paint was peeling in long, jaundiced strips, the single window looked out onto a brick wall, and the place smelled permanently of damp concrete and my neighbor's curry. I had paid the first month's rent and security deposit with the last of my savings, the money I had carefully squirreled away from the meager allowance Mark had given me. It left me with exactly $213 to my name. The first week was a blur of shame and shock. I'd wake up in the dark on a lumpy mattress I'd bought secondhand, my heart pounding with a visceral, physical anxiety. For a split second, I'd forget where I was, expecting to feel the smooth, high thread count sheets of my old bed, to smell the coffee Mark used to bring me. Then reality would crash down on me like a tidal wave. The cold linoleum floor, the stale air, the crushing weight of my failure. I spent hours just sitting on that mattress, staring at the brick wall, replaying every last conversation, every insult, every dismissive glance. Evelyn's voice was a constant phantom in my ear. A burden. You'll have nothing. Mark's weak justifications echoed in the empty space. That's just how she is. Don't be dramatic. The humiliation burned in my stomach like acid. It was a physical ache, a sickness that left me weak and nauseous. I barely ate. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. When I did drift off, my dreams were haunted by porcelain teacups shattering in slow motion. My friends tried to help. They brought groceries and offered wine-fueled pep talks. But they couldn't understand the specific brand of shame I was experiencing. They saw a simple divorce, a bad breakup. They didn't understand the psychological warfare I had endured, the slow, systematic erosion of my identity. They didn't know what it felt like to be told, day in and day out, that your very existence was an inconvenience. So I started to push them away, retreating into the lonely fortress of my own misery. One afternoon, about a month after I left, I hit rock bottom. I was walking home from another failed job interview, the rain soaking through my thin coat, my shoes squelching with every miserable step. I passed a high-end department store, the kind where Evelyn bought her cashmere sweaters. And I saw them. Mark and Evelyn, emerging from a black town car. They were laughing. Evelyn had her arm linked through her son's, looking up at him with pride. Mark looked relaxed, happy, unburdened. A stunningly beautiful woman in a tailored coat stood beside him, and he leaned in to whisper something in her ear that made her laugh, too. I froze on the sidewalk, a statue of discarded dreams. It was as if I was invisible. They hadn't just moved on, they had erased me. The life I thought I was a part of had closed over my absence without leaving so much as a ripple. I was a footnote in their story, already forgotten. In that moment, the grief and the shock that had been paralyzing me finally, blessedly, curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. It was a different kind of anger than I had ever felt before. It wasn't hot and explosive, it was cold, dense, and incredibly heavy. It settled deep in my bones, a core of solid steel. The self-pity evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a physical weapon. They would not get to win. They would not get to be right about me. That night, something shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't stare at the wall. I pulled out my old, slow laptop, wiped the dust off the screen, and I started to work. I had a degree in marketing, a sharp mind I had allowed to atrophy in the Sterling mansion, and $213. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My new life was a grueling montage of caffeine and desperation. I became a ghost that haunted the 24-hour diner down the street, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours while I used their free Wi-Fi. I took on any freelance work I could find, no matter how menial. I wrote marketing copy for plumbing companies. I designed hideous websites for used car dealerships. I managed social media accounts for dentists. The pay was abysmal, the clients were demanding, but every $5 payment that hit my PayPal account was a tiny victory, a single brick in the wall I was building around myself. I lived on instant noodles and cheap bread. I sold the last of my nice clothes, the remnants of my life as Mrs. Sterling, at a consignment shop, trading silk blouses for enough cash to keep the lights on. I became a master of a solitary existence. My world shrank to the four walls of my apartment and the glowing screen of my laptop. Days and nights blurred into one long, continuous grind. The loneliness was a constant companion. There were moments of profound doubt, nights when I'd lie awake, the weight of my ambition pressing down on me, and I'd wonder if I was crazy. Maybe Evelyn was right. Maybe I was just a girl from a humble background playing dress-up in a world I didn't belong in. Maybe I should just give up, get a simple 9 to 5, and accept my lot in life. But then I would remember their laughing faces outside that department store. I would remember the word burden, and the cold steel core of my rage would harden, pushing the doubt away. I wasn't just working for survival anymore. I was working for vengeance. Every dollar I saved, every skill I learned, was ammunition. I started studying the stock market. I read every book on investment strategy, venture capitalism, and market trends I could get from the library. I devoured financial news, watched interviews with CEOs, and taught myself how to read balance sheets and earnings reports. My tiny apartment was filled with stacks of borrowed books and notebooks filled with my frantic scribbles. The world of money, Evelyn's world, had always seemed like an impenetrable fortress. But the more I learned, the more I realized it wasn't magic. It was a system. It had rules. And anyone with enough discipline and intelligence could learn to play the game. After 6 months of relentless freelancing, I had scraped together a few $1,000s. It was more money than I had ever had in my life that was truly my own. I looked at it sitting in my bank account, a number that represented countless sleepless nights and gallons of cheap coffee. It was my war chest. I knew I couldn't get rich writing copy for dentists. I had to take a risk. I spent weeks researching, looking for an opportunity, a small, overlooked corner of the market where I could place a bet. I found it in a tiny, fledgling tech startup. They were developing a new kind of data compression algorithm. It was deeply unglamorous, highly technical, and completely ignored by major investors. But I read their white paper and I understood it. I saw the potential, the elegant, revolutionary simplicity of their idea. It was the biggest gamble of my life. I took almost everything I had saved, $5,000, and I invested it. The moment I clicked the confirm button on the trading platform, a wave of pure terror washed over me. I felt physically ill. This was it. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made, was riding on this one single bet. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I just sat in the dark, watching the brick wall, feeling the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of a person who has just pushed all their chips to the center of the table. For the first time since I'd left Mark, I wasn't just reacting to my past. I was actively, dangerously shaping my future. The game was on. Part 3. The Phoenix Rises. The first year after that initial investment was the longest of my life. The stock for the small tech company, DataWeave, did nothing. It just sat there, oscillating between fractions of a penny, a dormant volcano of my hopes and fears. Every morning, the first thing I did was check the stock price, my stomach clenching as I braced for the number to be 0. I continued my freelance grind, slowly rebuilding my savings, but my mind was always on that one terrifying gamble. The doubt was a constant, nagging whisper. You're an idiot. You fell for a pipe dream. Evelyn was right. You don't understand how money works. I almost sold it a dozen times. My finger would hover over the button, my mind screaming at me to cut my losses, to salvage what little I could. But then, I'd force myself to reread their white paper, to go back to the fundamentals of why I believed in them in the first place. My instincts, the gut feeling that had screamed, "This is it," held me back. I had to trust myself. It was the only thing I had left. And then, 18 months after my initial investment, it happened. A major software conglomerate announced they were acquiring a competitor of DataWeave for an obscene amount of money. Suddenly, the entire obscure world of data compression was thrust into the spotlight. Investors, terrified of missing the next big thing, started scrambling. And they found DataWeave. I woke up one Tuesday morning, made my coffee, and opened my laptop to check the stock price, just like any other day. I had to blink, thinking my screen was broken. The number wasn't just up. It had exploded. My $5,000 investment, the sum total of my blood, sweat, and tears, was suddenly worth $60,000. I stared at the screen, my mind unable to process the number. I refreshed the page. It was still there. I refreshed it again. The number went up. By the end of the day, my initial stake was worth over $100,000. I didn't cheer. I didn't scream. I just sat there in my shabby little apartment, in the dead quiet, and I began to weep. It wasn't a cry of joy, not really. It was a cry of profound, earth-shattering relief. It was the release of 18 months of terror, of grinding poverty, of suffocating doubt. It was the first time since I'd left Mark that I felt like I could truly breathe. I had been right. My mind, my judgment, my instincts, they were worth something after all. I wasn't a burden. I was a force. That money was the foundation. It was the seed from which my empire would grow. I didn't cash out and buy a fancy car or a new apartment. I lived the same Spartan life, but now my work changed. I wasn't just a freelancer anymore. I was an investor. I quit the soul-crushing copywriting gigs and dedicated myself full-time to the market. I founded my own firm, a one-woman operation run from my kitchen table. I called it Phoenix Ventures. It was cheesy, I knew, but it was for me. A reminder that I had risen from the ashes of my former life. My strategy was simple. I looked for what others overlooked. I invested in the brilliant, the nerdy, the unglamorous startups with revolutionary ideas but terrible marketing. I used my marketing background to help them, not just with money, but with strategy. I became a partner, not just a financier. And my instincts, honed by desperation and fury, proved to be razor-sharp. One success followed another. A biotech firm working on synthetic skin grafts. A logistics company that developed an AI for optimizing shipping routes. A green energy startup with a new solar panel technology. Within 5 years, Laura Evans, the girl Evelyn Sterling once pitted for her cheap shoes, was a name whispered with respect in boardrooms and venture capital circles. Phoenix Ventures was no longer a kitchen table operation. I had a corner office in a glass tower downtown, with a view that stretched to the horizon. I had a small, brilliant team of analysts who were fiercely loyal to me. I wore custom-tailored suits that felt like armor, and I drove a car that was worth more than Evelyn's precious teacups. The magazines started calling. Forbes did a 30 under 30 feature. Bloomberg profiled my unconventional investment strategy. But the success felt abstract. It was numbers on a screen, headlines in a magazine. I hadn't forgotten the promise I made to myself. It wasn't just about being successful. It was about becoming untouchable. I never looked up the Sterlings. I made a conscious effort not to. I didn't want to be fueled by petty jealousy or a need to compare. My rage had cooled from a burning fire to a focused blue-hot flame. It was my engine, not my master. I poured all of my energy, all of my focus, into building. The call came on a crisp autumn evening. I was working late, reviewing a prospectus for a new investment. The name on the caller ID was one I hadn't seen in years. An old college friend who had, through a series of unfortunate social obligations, remained tangentially in the Sterling's orbit. Laura. Wow. It's been forever. You look amazing, by the way. I see you in the magazines, she began, her voice full of false cheer. It's good to hear from you, Sarah. What's up? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. There was a pause. Listen, this is kind of awkward, but I was at a charity thing last night, and I saw Evelyn Sterling. My hand tightened on my pen. I said nothing. She looked rough, Laura. Really rough. And people were talking. You know Sterling Industries, their company? It's in trouble. Bad trouble. My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Sarah continued, now in a conspiratorial whisper. Apparently, after Richard passed away a couple of years ago, Mark took over more of the day-to-day. And he's just run it into the ground. A series of terrible investments, a failure to adapt to new markets, they're leveraged to the hilt. The word is, they're on the brink of collapse. They're desperately looking for an investor to bail them out, but no one will touch them. Their reputation is shot. I listened, my face a mask of calm, but inside, a strange and terrible symphony was beginning to play. The irony was so thick, so potent, I could almost taste it. Sterling Industries, the bedrock of their arrogance, the source of their power over me, was crumbling. And it was Mark's weakness, the very same weakness that had allowed his mother to poison our marriage, that was the cause. "Thanks for letting me know, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "Yeah, well, I just thought you'd want to know. It's crazy, right? How things turn out." We hung up, and I swiveled my chair to face the wall of glass that was my office window. The city lights glittered below me like a carpet of scattered diamonds. I thought of Evelyn's condescending smile, of Mark's casual betrayal. I thought of the damp, miserable apartment and the taste of instant noodles. I felt no joy, no triumphant glee, just a profound, chilling sense of destiny. The universe was finally balancing its books. For a week, I did nothing. I went about my work, my meetings, my life. But the knowledge of their failure was a constant hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. I was waiting. I didn't know what for, but I knew, with an absolute certainty, that this story wasn't over. The email arrived the following Tuesday. The subject line was simply, "A private matter." The sender was Evelyn Sterling. My assistant had flagged it, assuming it was junk mail, but the name caught my eye. I clicked it open, my pulse quickening. The email was short, stilted, and stripped of all her usual flowery language. It reeked of desperation. "Dear Laura, I hope this message finds you well. I have been following your impressive career with great admiration. Your success is truly a testament to your character. I am writing to request the courtesy of a private meeting to discuss a matter of some urgency and mutual interest. I would be grateful for the opportunity to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Evelyn Sterling." I read it 3 times. The whiplash of her words, admiration, testament to your character, was almost comical. This was the same woman who had called me a burden with no breeding. I leaned back in my leather chair, the city stretching out beneath me, and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just watched its prey walk willingly into a trap. The plotting began. This wouldn't be a simple no. That was too easy, too merciful. This required something more. It required a performance. It required a stage. It required a reckoning that she would never, ever forget. I buzzed my assistant. "Carla, please clear my schedule for Thursday evening." "Of course, Ms. Evans. Any meetings I should schedule?" "Just one," I said, my eyes fixed on Evelyn's pathetic email. "I'll be handling the arrangements myself." I opened a new email draft. "Evelyn, I can make time on Thursday. 7 o'clock. There's a restaurant, Aria, on the 60th floor of the Citadel Tower. I've taken the liberty of booking a private room. I look forward to hearing what's on your mind. Regards, Laura." I didn't choose Aria by accident. It was the most exclusive, most expensive restaurant in the city, and it was located 2 floors directly above my office. She would have to walk into my building, ride the elevator up to my world, to beg for my help. The stage was set, and I was ready for the final act. I hit send, the click of the mouse sealing her fate. The cliffhanger wasn't what she would do. It was what I was about to become. Part 4. The Art of Justice. The day of the meeting, I felt a strange and profound calm. It wasn't the jittery excitement of a victory lap or the nervous energy of a confrontation. It was the absolute serenity of a chess master who sees the board, knows every possible move, and has already cornered the king. I spent the day in back-to-back meetings, closing a seven-figure deal for a new AI robotics firm. My focus was absolute. I compartmentalized my life with the ruthless efficiency I had applied to my business. The evening with Evelyn was a separate ledger, a personal account that was about to be settled. At 6 o'clock, I sent my team home, telling them to celebrate the new deal. Order the best champagne, I told my lead analyst with a smile. On me. Alone in my office, I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. I showered in my private executive bathroom and changed not into a power suit, but into a simple, elegant black dress made of heavy silk. It was understated, confident, and astronomically expensive. My only jewelry was a simple, delicate diamond necklace, a piece I had bought for myself to mark my first $1 million year. It was a quiet statement. Everything I had earned. Nothing was a gift from a man. I walked the 2 flights of stairs up to Aria, the soft click of my heels on the marble echoing in the silent stairwell. I wanted to feel the ascent. I wanted to arrive with the slow, deliberate pace of someone in complete control. The hostess at Aria knew me by name. Ms. Evans. Good evening. Your table is ready. Your guest has just arrived. Thank you, Isabel, I said, handing her my coat. She led me through the main dining room, a cavern of hushed conversations, clinking glasses, and panoramic views of the glittering city. Heads turned as I passed. I was a known quantity here. And then I saw her. Evelyn was seated in a plush velvet chair in our private dining room, her back to the door. The room was encased in glass, making her look like a specimen in a jar, the sprawling, powerful city her backdrop. She looked older than I remembered, and profoundly tired. The flawless chignon was still there, but a few stray hairs had escaped. The expensive silk blouse she wore seemed to hang on her, her once regal posture now slumped with the weight of her desperation. I paused in the doorway for a moment, observing her. The woman who had held my entire world in the palm of her hand, who could crush my spirit with a single, well-aimed whisper, now sat waiting for me, a supplicant in my domain. I stepped into the room. Evelyn. She startled, her head whipping around. Her eyes widened as she took me in. I saw a flicker of emotions cross her face, shock, envy, and a deep, soul-crushing resentment. She was seeing the physical manifestation of everything she told me I could never be. Laura, she breathed, standing up a little too quickly. You look well. I am well, I said, my voice even and calm. I took the seat opposite her, the vast expanse of the city lights behind me, putting her face in the full glare of the room's soft lighting. Thank you for coming. A waiter appeared, silent and efficient. Ms. Evans, would you care for a drink? A glass of the 98 Lafite Rothschild, perhaps. Just sparkling water for me, thank you, I said, without looking at him. I turned my gaze back to Evelyn. Evelyn. She looked flustered. The wine would be lovely, thank you. She was trying to reclaim some semblance of her old status, ordering the most expensive wine on the menu by memory. It was a pathetic, transparent gesture. When the waiter left, an uncomfortable silence descended. She fiddled with the stem of her empty wine glass, her manicured nails tapping against the crystal. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a brittle, nervous energy. I waited. I knew the first rule of negotiation: the first person to speak loses. I had all the time in the world. Finally, she broke. I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here, she began, her voice strained. I have a few ideas, I replied, my tone neutral. Her face flushed. She took a deep breath, and the words came spilling out in a rush, a torrent of humiliation she could no longer hold back. She told me everything Sarah had hinted at. How Richard's death had revealed the cracks in the company's foundation. How Mark, in a desperate attempt to prove himself his father's equal, had made a series of disastrously aggressive, poorly researched acquisitions. How they'd borrowed heavily, using their own legacy as collateral. Now, the banks were calling in their loans, and the entire Sterling empire, the company, the mansion, the very name, was on the verge of being repossessed and dismantled. "We need a capital infusion," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "A partner. Someone who can see the long-term value in the Sterling name, who can help us weather this storm." I listened without interrupting, my expression unreadable. I let her lay all her cards on the table, let her expose the full depth of her failure. Every word she spoke was a vindication. Every admission of Mark's incompetence was a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still there. He hadn't just failed me, he had failed the only thing that ever truly mattered to him and his mother, their legacy. When she was finished, she looked at me, her eyes pleading. The mask of the proud matriarch had crumbled, revealing the terrified old woman beneath. "Laura, I know how this must look. I know we had our differences in the past. I was protective of my son, perhaps overly so. I can see now that I misjudged you." I had to suppress a bitter laugh. Misjudged me. The monumental understatement of the century. "You didn't misjudge me, Evelyn," I said, my voice soft, yet carrying the sharp edge of a razor. "You despised me. You saw me as nothing more than a social climbing parasite, unworthy of your son, your name, and your world. Let's not insult either of our intelligences by pretending otherwise." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Color rose in her cheeks. For a second, I saw a flash of the old Evelyn, the haughty queen, but it vanished as quickly as it came, extinguished by the sheer weight of her desperation. "What do you want, Laura?" she whispered. "An apology? Very well. I am sorry. I am sorry for how I treated you." "Oh, I don't want an apology," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Apologies are words. They're cheap. I'm in the business of assets and value. Tangible things." The waiter arrived with her wine. He poured the deep red liquid into her glass with practiced grace. Evelyn stared at it, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for it. She took a large gulp, like a condemned woman taking her last drink. "So you won't help us," she said, her voice flat. "I didn't say that," I replied. I let the sentence hang in the air, watching as a flicker of hope ignited in her weary eyes. That was the cruelty of it. Not the denial, but the hope. Sterling Industries, despite its current mismanagement, has a few legacy assets that might be worth salvaging. The brand name, while tarnished, still has some recognition. I paused, taking a slow sip of my water. I was drawing it out, making her live in this moment of absolute powerlessness. "I am willing," I said, choosing my words with surgical precision, "to provide the necessary financial support to save the company from bankruptcy." Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, Laura, thank you. Thank you. You have no idea what this means." "I haven't finished," I cut in, my voice turning to ice. "I said I would help. But it will be on my terms. And my terms are not negotiable." I slid a thin leather-bound folder across the table. "I had my legal team draw it up that afternoon. Phoenix Ventures will acquire a 51% controlling stake in Sterling Industries for the symbolic price of $1. We will assume all of your outstanding debt. In effect, I will own you." Her mouth fell open. The wine glass nearly slipped from her fingers. 51%? But that's everything. "That's the price of survival," I said calmly. "But there's more. Term number 2. Mark will be immediately removed from his position as CEO and will have no further role in the company's operations. He can keep an office in the basement if it makes him feel important, but he will have no authority. He will answer to the new CEO. And who will that be? She asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. I gave her a slow, deliberate smile. Me, of course. The blood drained from her face. She looked utterly broken, a ghost in a silk blouse. But I wasn't done. I had saved the best for last. And the final condition, Evelyn, you will step down from the board. You will relinquish all decision-making roles, all titles, and all authority. However, you will be given a new position, an honorary title. You will serve as a consultant to me. You will be required to be in the office 3 days a week. Your job will be to provide me with the history of the company, to help with the transition, to pour my coffee in meetings if I ask you to. You will report directly and only to me. You will watch every day as I rebuild the company your son destroyed and your husband could barely maintain. You will watch me succeed where you and your bloodline failed. Silence. The only sound was the distant, muted hum of the city below. She stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. Her pride, the only thing she had left, was warring with the primal instinct for survival. This isn't business, she finally choked out, tears now streaming freely down her face. This is cruelty. I leaned back in my chair, my face a perfect, placid mask. No, Evelyn, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, the same volume she once used to humiliate me. This is justice. You once told me that money runs the world. You were right. My money. My world. You taught me the rules, and I just got better at the game than you. I paused, letting the full weight of her new reality crush her. It's strange, isn't it? I said, echoing words from a life that felt a million years away. Life has a way of reminding us that money isn't everything, but respect, that matters. You will learn to respect me. The choice is yours. Accept my terms, or watch the legacy your family spent a century building be sold for parts at a bankruptcy auction. You have until morning to decide. I stood up, my movements fluid and unhurried. I placed a few $100 bills on the table to cover her wine and left her there, alone in the glass room, a queen deposed in her crumbling kingdom, with a contract for her unconditional surrender sitting in front of her. Walking away from that meeting, I felt no bitterness, no savage joy, just a profound, quiet sense of peace. The greatest revenge wasn't humiliating Evelyn, it was the quiet, undeniable fact that she had been forced to come to me. My success wasn't just a shield, it was a weapon, and it had delivered a final, killing blow without me ever having to raise my voice. I had built myself into someone untouchable, and her world was now mine to command. Her insults, her whispers, her scorn, they were nothing more than the distant, pathetic echoes of a ghost, powerless to ever harm me again. My name wasn't Sterling anymore. My name was on the building. They say living well is the best revenge, but sometimes taking control is even better. She thought my worth was tied to her money, but I proved that true power comes from within. It comes from the fire that burns when they try to extinguish you. If you've ever fought your way back from the brink, let me know your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice and sweet, sweet revenge. Until next time, remember, don't get bitter, get better. And then, get even.